Hello, everyone. It is that Weems guy here for another episode, and we have a disturbing streak of putting out episodes on a weekly basis here lately. And I don't know how to handle that. Um, Oddly enough, the show numbers have shot back up since we've been regularly putting out episodes. So maybe there's something to that. Joining us today is Mr. Erik Lund. How are you doing, Eric?
I'm doing great, thank you.
I can tell by the reflection in the window behind you that you were just having an awful life these days.
Yeah, this definitely isn't the Georgia mountains, and yeah, I've been retired now, getting close to 2 years, and I am enjoying the peace of mind that comes with that. So yes, doing well.
Yeah, that's a far cry from Metro Atlanta. I can tell you that.
It definitely is.
Yeah, folks, we may hear a little wind noise and something. Eric is sitting outside in the mountains of the Big Sky West, and I'm completely positively envious. I'm not mad at him at all. Um, Eric's been on the show several times, but I'll just remind the audience Eric was a state trooper in Virginia, and
Correct.
then he was a federal agent for a while, so he's almost been a cop. Um, he's been around cop stuff. You know, he might not have actually done cop stuff. He's been around it when other people did it. Yeah, that's a little cop humor there. Had to pick on the state and the federal guys. Of course, I guess I'm just yeah. Um, and then he's also a grandmaster, so he is allowed to have opinions on the internet about shooting because he is a USPSA grandmaster. And you shot for both SIG and FN, if I remember correctly, right?
I did. I shot 2 years for SIG's three-gun shooting team when they first started, and then I jumped over and got a gracious offer from FN America or FNH USA, and I shot for them for about 6 or 7 years on the three-gun pro circuit tour.
And this is the greatest time of year with the opening of college football, and Eric was a college running back as well.
I was, and I'm still repping Georgia here. I had to make sure that, yeah, go Gunner and Nate Frazier, man, awesome job.
Yeah,
So,
well, I've graduated from four colleges now, so my Saturdays get busy. I had games on three different machines yesterday from three of my alma maters watching, and
right.
I went 3 for 4 this weekend, so it was a pretty good weekend.
I'm just Georgia and Penn State, and we went 2 for 2, so I'm good.
There you
Good.
go. All right, audience, we need to be very clear here that a couple of weeks ago we had Steve Moses and Chuck Haggard on, and we talked about the use of 22s for defensive purposes. And I gotta say that episode did really well. Uh, it went over 500 plays on both the podcast and YouTube in the first few days, and so it did really well. Generated a lot of commentary, a lot of comments and stuff on the YouTube video comparatively. When I say a lot for my audience or our audience, not like some of the big channels. I like to think that we stay in the deep end of the pool, and that scares away the mouth breathers for the most part. Eric immediately contacted me after the episode. I want to refute some of that. This is not a gotcha directed towards Steve and Chuck by any means whatsoever. Eric just wants to refute some of the things that were put forth in that episode, and I'll be introducing Eric to Steve and Chuck, and maybe we can do an episode where they all get on. But I woke up this morning and like, you know what? If I'm going to have an episode tomorrow, I probably need to get somebody on today. And trying to get three people lined up was too monumentous. So, Eric, take it away.
Yeah, I up here, we have a lot of distance, and that's why speed limits are suggestions around here, because Montana is a big state, and sometimes you got to get a little fast to get from one place to the other. So it gives me plenty of time to listen to your podcasts. And of course, I think I think the phrases are "I got out over my skis" or "I outkicked my coverage" or some version of that. But I got home and got my little Cheeto stained fingers and got on my text and sent you that text. Like, um, I've got some thoughts on those topics, and yeah, so that's how we ended up here. And and we talked about this before it went live, and I just wanted to reiterate with mainly Steve, but also with Chuck, that man, this is just instructors, at a conference, sitting at a bar, having a beer or whiskey, and talking about philosophies and ideas and concepts. And that although I've never met either of them, clearly they're both very talented in what they do, and I have tremendous respect for them. So as we said, this is really just instructor debate, talking about philosophies and concepts, and are these are the concepts consistent with what we're trying to accomplish? We've talked about it before. The I always feel like the goal of an instructor should be to take the 360-degree circular real world and bring it to the training square range. And too many times in the instructor community, we see square range tactics and techniques develop that work on the square range, and then we try to fit them in the real world round hole, and they're not as effective. So I'm always of the opinion that we need to take the round peg and hammer it into the square peg, and not vice versa. Right? Bring stuff from the real world and mimic it on the training range, and not vice versa. And so with that, we have discussions about, you know, is this technique going to work, or is this concept work? Or, like for example, we always have a little laugh about the scan process, right? We get out there in the post shooting, and philosophically, it's a good idea. It breaks tunnel vision and keeps our awareness, does this, looks for other multiple threats. But then what do we end up seeing on the range? Bang, bang, to, left and right, and then we go. And as instructors, we let that go, right? We don't jump on the way it is, right? Because for us, they're checking the box. But is this going to suffice it out in the 360-degree real world? No. Do we let our students turn around on the range to do a real scan? Well, no, because there's a 180 rule. We can't have them point a gun behind us. But on the real world, that's not applicable. If I just went into a bedroom, do I need to do a 360 scan when that's the only door and there's the bedroom? No, I've cleared the room. I don't need to do stuff. So we kind of get in these traps where we develop techniques in the square range, and sometimes they don't work. They're a good idea. We mean well. They have practical application, but they just don't fit in the circular world box well. So when this discussion came up, and there were some talks, and and basically this comes down on the philosophy of use of a 22 versus how effective that is, right? So in order to kind of keep this discussion in a lane, there are certain stipulations that I would offer up. Certain things I completely agree with that we don't need to spend time discussing. And I have gotten to that point where I do need to use my cheaters here and there. So you're going to see these come on occasionally, and obviously you and I had a little laugh before, because I'll show your audience. Yeah, these were the notes that I made on that episode, and and I even had the highlights of them. So let me run down a few of the stipulations that I completely agree with, so we don't have to waste time on stuff that we all agree on. One, you said that 22s are not ideal. Absolutely. Completely agree with that. They're about as far from ideal as you could get, right? I also agree that a 22 is better than nothing. When you look at some type of dangerous encounter, I'd rather have a 22 than kind words. And so obviously it's better than nothing. I think I can also stipulate that virtually any caliber round that hits the cranium or hits the heart, whether it's the main heart, the aortic arch, or anything, is going to be an effective hit. right? We talk about this all the time. A hit with a 22 is better than a miss with a 44. So, from a ballistic point of view, if you hit those critical areas, that's going to be an effective hit. You know, so I agree that can the 22 be effective, irrespective of whether we're shooting hollow points or full metal jacket, soft lead. Yeah, it just goes back to the whole thing. If you hit them in the right spot, right, it's going to be effective. Deterrence and force of display, sure, right, because I think those are going to be effective. So having a 22 pistol or a 22 rifle, any type of firearm, is an effective deterrent for use of force or somebody that's threatening you, right? And the last thing is, yeah, it's a great beginner round. It's a great training round. It's a great round for practice for all those reasons we've already talked about: the low recoil, the low report, the cost, the financial aspects of it. All those are are excellent points, and I would stipulate to all of that. So, with that, anything on those you want to comment back on?
No, just I do appreciate you pointing out that we all agreed from the outset that 22 would not be ideal. It would not be the perfect choice that any of us would make. Um, I do want to point out, I think Steve and Chuck were saying, under these considerations, that we would say a 22. Like I said, I've got a 21-year-old female that I've worked with some that shoots very well with a 9 millimeter semi-automatic pistol, Glock 48s and the like. Uh, but she keeps going back to wanting to shoot a 22.
I apologize for that. We just got a little burst of wind, so I'm not hearing it on the feedback on this side. So hopefully this wind isn't too bad on your
Yeah.
audio.
Yeah, I got a little bit because I'm wearing a headset and getting. Of course, speaking of audio, I've gotten a couple of complaints lately about low audio noise, or for listening to it. Folks, understand I am not very technically astute. I record these interviews via Zoom, and whatever Zoom gives me is what immediately goes up onto the podcast and the YouTube feeds. I don't do any kind of processing. I don't know how, and I'm probably not going to put forth the effort even to learn how. When I play it back on my machine, it sounds fine. And when I say my machine, I'll say all of my machine's devices. It sounds fine. And so I'm not discounting what people say about complaining about the audio. I just don't hear it when I play the stuff back myself. And I've played it on different phones, computers, everything, trying to hear what's going on. And occasionally I can see a different or hear a difference in the audio, but I don't know how to fix it. And no, I can't make it be louder on your machine.
Yeah, I chose the outdoor studio today.
Yeah,
If the wind becomes a problem,
yeah,
yeah, I'll have to move to my indoor studio next time.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, so we framed kind of the conversation about what do we stipulate to and this and that. So really, kind of after listening, I found it to be a very interesting episode, interesting take, and kind of where I took issue with it was with a little bit of Steve's aspect of the courses that he offers. And it's really just um, does his philosophy of the course, is it congruent with the people that he's trying to work with? And one, anytime you get anybody out to the range, I think that's a good thing under whatever auspices that you get them there. You introduce them to firearms, you introduce them to safety, you help mitigate some of their fears or concerns. And these shooters that he's working with in this group that this his course is targeted to, I guess the best way I would describe them is they're hesitant shooters. They're not necessarily scared, but they're just hesitant. um, and then by his own definition, these are people that aren't going to take courses. They're going to come out for this 4 hour course. This is, he's quoted like, this is the only course they're ever going to take. They're going to get this gun and they want to save it for the guy that's kicking in the back door and the cops don't arrive 15 minutes later. Uh, you know, and so you have this person, right? And I think the best way I can describe it is they're just hesitant. They want to dip their toe in the pool, and that's kind of where they want to stay. That's their comfort zone. But they recognize that they would like something better than some harsh words if something bad or some type of evil was to confront them. And then he goes on to describe his course and this and that. And the problem I see with all of this is that it's the shooter themselves, right? It's that hesitant person, right? Um, and the problem becomes, I guess the best way I can put it is kind of from a philosophical instructor training point of view. It's like somebody that's scared of swimming, and we're going to get them to the edge of the pool, and they're going to dip their toe in, and we're going to be like, see, it's not that bad. And they'll be like, yeah, okay, I can do that. I overcame this little fear of my pool or whatever. And then we kind of just push them in the deep end and be like, hey, now you're ready for a violent confrontation. You know, have at it. And of course, it's not there. But is that the instructor's fault? Not necessarily. I think it's that hesitant shooter's fault, right? And obviously, the question then becomes, well, what do you do for them? How do you make that person better? And this kind of comes under the Lund family motto, which is you can't save everybody,
Yeah.
right? If I've got a drug addict, if they don't want help, I can't save them, right? 4 hours is enough to make somebody. We could even make the argument that 4 hours isn't even enough to even really make them safe on gun handling, let alone all of the stuff that Steve does an admirable job of packing into a 4-minute course between, the safety aspect, the shooting aspect, the fundamentals, the post shooting aspect. And he gets all that information in a 4-hour course for these people. But at some level or some point, if they don't take it upon themselves to recognize, or if they're not cognizant of the fact that, they recognize that there's evil out there and they want something more than harsh words. But if they're not willing to accept that they have to put in a little bit more effort than a 4-hour course, and I'm going to call it good and never do it again, then I can't help you. I can't prepare you for any of that in 4 hours. So how do I deal with that? I think once again, Steve is admirable in the course that he offers and the people that he's bringing into the training community and the firearms community, and that's a good thing. But I also think, I have to look back as like, as instructors, are we doing these people a disservice, not giving them the hard truth? And the hard truth is, yeah, you can come to this course and I can give you a 22, but this is nowhere even remotely adequate for what you need, even if what you need is, I want to stay in my bedroom, lock the door in case somebody tries to kick it down, and that's it. Even within that aspect, it's woefully inadequate. So do we welcome these people in the community and give them a taste and hope they come back for another course and tell them that we need to, or do we just give them the full, or push them out the door and say, good luck, I can't save you. Where are we on that?
Yeah. I don't think that Steve's advocating for this. They should only have this 4-hour course and that prepares them, for everything they're going to encounter and is good. I think he is recognizing the reality of this may be the only 4 hours that he gets with somebody. And so let's try to make the most of it that we can. Um, Americans, we feel in general, we act like we all know how to shoot a gun because of the fact that we were born as Americans. And we kind of feel the same way about driving. And what's that one thing that firearms instructors hate to hear is, I've been shooting all my life,
Right.
because now we know we've got all sorts of problems that we're going to have to contend with that we
We know.
wouldn't have for a brand new student. Well, I've been driving legally since the mid to late 1980s. I was driving extra legally. I won't say illegally, but extra legally prior to that. Um, I got a chance to read the Georgia driver's manual well before I got of age and saw that you could drive legally for agricultural purposes. So it's amazing what I determined to be agricultural purposes. You throw a bale of hay in the back of the pickup truck, you can go anywhere in the state you want to go. So at least that was my argument. Anyway, um, last year I had the chance to take a high speed driving class, and I would not have labeled myself a good driver going into this class, but I would have labeled myself a cautious driver. Um, I still do not label myself a good driver, but I got much better in that week long driving class that I took. Um, and at the end of it, I was able to do things with the car that I wasn't able to do at the beginning of it. I can now still do some things that I was not able to do prior to the course of the car, but not at the way level I was doing it at the end of the class. And we see that a lot in firearms training as well. So I'm saying all that to say that I see your point is if I get somebody in for a 4 hour class or a full 1 day class or even a weekend class, I can get them up to a certain level of performance by the end of that class, but that doesn't mean learning has occurred. That just means while I'm standing there and working with them, I'm getting a certain level of performance out of them. And their peak at the end of that training session is not their cold standard peak. And I think that kind of plays into what you're saying there. Sure, I'll take them at the end of this 4 hour. I get them out on the range. They're running fine with the gun. Are they going to be able to do that under stress? And I don't know the answer to that. Well, I think I do know the answer to that. And it's not as well as we would like, but probably better than before they were when they took the class.
See, let me see. I will be the contrarian on that point,
Okay.
right? And I will say that first of all, not having known Steve or seen his course or material,
Mm-hmm.
I would absolutely expect that he would be continuing to try to, get these people to another course or, and explain all of this, all these points we're making that while I'm happy, they showed up for this 4 hour course,
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole world that they still need to, if they truly want to be effective in their own protection of their family. So it was not my intent to say that he is, he's selling them a 4 hour course and then sending them out on their own,
Right.
you know. And it would be interesting, I guess, from his point of view, in discussing is when he has these people and they have that conversation like, hey, I'm happy to have you for this 4 hour course. How many people come back for a second one? Like, how successful is he
Mm-hmm.
versus the people that says, hey, I did it, you know, I feel better, but I'll never do this again. Now I feel comfortable. I can have a gun in my house. If somebody does something, I have this. And of course, we all know the absolute truth that you are nowhere near prepared for that. So it'd be interesting from his experience to see how many people come back after that 4 hour. Like they recognize it's that how many people understand that they don't know what they don't know, and then become enlightened by that 4 hour course is like, yeah, I've either had fun or I want to do this again or punching holes in paper. I want to, and for whatever reason is they come back versus the people that, they came, they dipped their toe, they said they did it, and we'll never see them again, you know. Um, and so I worry, the contrarian point is I worry that um, with just a 4 hour program, and just that tiny bit exposure because you're going to have the intro, you're going to have the safety, you're going to have the postscript. So let's say in that 2 hour program or the 4 hour program, they get 2 hours of actual trigger time. But is that finite amount enough to make them even remotely capable to manipulate a rifle versus under stress they're trying to do it and they're trying to recall what they learned. And in the process of doing that, it slows down the reaction time versus not having one at all. I mean, how proficient can we make somebody? I mean, that's the whole FLETC thing, that we always talk about training in 2 hour training blocks. How effective can I be as an instructor when, you know, uh, at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center is they give me a 2 hour block to teach brand new firearms. In a 2 hour block, it's all I can do to get them to draw the gun out of the holster safely, versus everything else that goes into it. So I wonder if just say 2 hours of live fire training of um, those drills, if that doesn't introduce too many variables and it short circuits these people versus no training at all, other than, I know how to make the gun safe type thing. So it'd be interesting to see that, but I can see that such a brief period of time may cause people to short circuit their own self in their own OODA loop, because they haven't built any muscle memory, they haven't built anything, they haven't practiced, they haven't dry fired, and they're like, I know I'm supposed to do something with this, but I can't recall while somebody's kicking the door, or they push a button and they drop the magazine as opposed to take the safety off, and now they short circuit themselves. And on a performance level, that performance has degraded a little bit because we introduced, basically, I guess the phrase that we introduced just enough information for them to be dangerous to themselves, as opposed to working on it.
Yeah, I hear your argument, yeah, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. But I could also say that I think that time is better than no time at all. If there's going to be a firearm in play, uh, perhaps it's a better answer to say keep a baseball bat or a golf club handy, and whack the dude versus trying to employ a firearm. But that may not be realistic either.
I I could make the argument. I think that sometimes in these cases would be a better option.
Yeah. Well,
You know,
I have had firearm students that at the end of some training, I counseled them that this is probably not for you. That we need
yeah,
to look at some other options, pepper spray or something else. And but those have been few and far between where it was like, look, this just isn't an option for you. Let's look at something else. Uh,
yeah, yeah, and that kind of just rolls into getting a little deeper into the course itself is recommending 1022s, and I mean we're recommending long guns,
yeah,
right? Um, and those within themselves bring their own challenges. He talks about, when I say he, I meant Steve. Um, yeah, I mean, one of his quotes was, "Training is critical to use these rifles." But by the very definition of the people that take this course, they're people that don't want to train, aren't going to train, and aren't going to follow up. So we're talking about with these rifles in that podcast, talking about manual of arms. He's talking about snap shooting. Um, then we talked about 22s and potential malfunctions, and you're talking about this whole manual of arms that Steve recognizes that you need this training to be effective on this rifle, but then we're putting this rifle in people's hands by the very definition don't want to train. So I see where it's the philosophy is solid, but the practicality of it is if they don't want to train, I can't put a kitchen knife in their hand and tell them to go chop an onion, and not cut off their finger. It's so we're telling these people, hey, come in, take this 22 for all these good reasons, right? Economical, low recoil, this and that. For the worst case emergency, I know you're not going to practice. I know you're not going to dry fire. I know you're not going to do maintenance. But I also recognize that if you don't know the manual arms and you don't do your maintenance and you don't do your ammo selection, that this is going to be a disaster.
yeah, I would agree, but I also will point out that that is most of the gun owning public in the United States.
Hmm. I don't
We
know if
can't
I would.
we can't take like the people that are listening to this podcast are probably people who train.
I would
You,
totally agree with that. Yeah.
you and I are people who have trained and continue to train. Um, we are not the average person that walks into a gun store and buys a low end gun and goes and puts it in the nightstand. Well, I'm armed. I've got a gun. That never even get any training whatsoever. Um, Akil Kadir and Tiffany Johnson have their gateway instructor class, and one of the things they tell the people that come to it is like, look, they aren't us, and we have to remember that too. Is as we start talking about these things, is there's a difference between people who buy a gun and think that they are armed, and people who actually go out and train. And then you get to some people that will go and do whatever that one, call around and talk about the 1%. They go and get the government mandated training that they're required to get a carry license or permit that their state requires. How do we get beyond that? Well, there are how many millions of gun owners in the United States, and there's a relatively small handful of people that we see over and over and over again at the training classes. And we appreciate it because their checks continue to cash. But we also have to take note of the fact that we're only going to get some people for a half a day or one day. And so, what's the answer? Just tell them, look, if this is all you're going to do, don't do anything.
Yeah, I think that's the great question, right? And so when you say that, that this idea of the shooter reflects the majority of shooters in the country, I think we can delineate that even further because those people went out and got the gun or was passed down or they've had some experience with it, like they're comfortable. We're still in those hesitant shooters, those people that I don't even know if I want to do this versus. So, and I think you can that subgroup, that hesitant shooter that we're talking about, I think that's even a smaller percentage than the average people in the country, you know. And yeah, so the question becomes, what is the minimum level of training that we should be offering? Is 4 hours enough? I think, I know uh, years ago working with the NRA and running the NRA concealed carry programs in Virginia. We did 3 hours just on safety and manipulation and taking the gun apart and cleaning it and maintaining.
Yeah.
And that was just a 3 hour block. Um, so it really comes down to, yeah, is 4 hours enough for a minimum? Of course, you ask any instructor, we'd all like more time with people,
Right.
right? But where's that diminishing return where we come back and say, hey, you know what? 4 hours isn't enough for this. I'm happy to teach you a safe handling class. I'm happy to teach you a fundamental class, but I'm not going to teach you or take 4 hours and call it a defensive class or call it this or that. I mean, where do we draw that line and say, look, I can't get you what you want, and I can't get you to the level of what you want in just 4 hours. All right. Now, from a business perspective,
Yeah.
one of the things that you don't see in the firearms community that I think would make an effective business model is kind of the martial arts community, right? Where if you could get people to come back and, every week on Tuesday night, we're doing firearms training and we have a class from 6 to 8 p.m. or from 7 to 9 p.m. And people can come after work and, hey, this week, this block, we're going to work on, draws. Or this week in this 2 hour block, we're going to work on one hand manipulations, and make it a the same business model as jujitsu or any
Yeah.
martial art, where you can come 2 or 3 times a week and get a training block. And if for some reason you can't make it that night, then you come a later night or you come the next week. and then something where we can get people into this idea of training. Just you, I can you give me 2 hours a night, I can teach you one topic.
Yeah.
But I also know that, hey, Thursday night, I'm going to offer this as the companion topic, and then you have kind of like your beginner, your white belt classes, your yellow belt classes. Then you have your intermediate classes. Then you have your expert, your black belt classes. And if we could get people into that type of a business model with ranges where every Tuesday night we train, 7 to 9 p.m. If you want to show up, you show up,
Yeah.
and do that. And then I think we could do some stuff with that. I think that would be an interesting concept because obviously it's successful in the combative arts side.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to see if we could do that on the firearm side.
I know some people who take that approach, but they're all people who have access to indoor ranges in metro areas.
Yeah.
And, Tom Givens of Rangemaster had like a bunch of 4-hour classes that they offered. But he was in Memphis with that and, you know, had a steady supply of customers that would come in and start with the first one and we're through. Carl Wren does that at his facility in Texas, and he's got 3 metro areas within an hour of him to pull through. He can get people on the weekends. I know a couple of other training groups and the like. Ideally, that would be better off because, recency is a very strong indicator of success. Um, but that's the magic bubble that everybody asks that's in the training business is to how do you actually make money off of this and make it successful and turn out a viable product. And I always tell people that contact me and ask me those questions, like if you can crack that nut,
Right.
all of us want to hear it.
Right.
Um, I've had numerous instances where I've had to take the foot off the gas in my training business, and then every time I start back up, I have to rebuild it from scratch.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh no, I get it. I'm in the same boat. The building this house has sucked up all my oxygen,
Mhm.
but hopefully I'll get back in the training side and be able to have some time to start getting back in the training community and start doing some things again. But
Yeah.
yeah, so then oh, go ahead.
Before we went live, you were talking about we're also saying that the efficacy of the 22 was you got to hit this aortic arch.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was
Yeah,
going to go. Is
yeah,
once again, this is kind of that, with Steve, kind of just, with this philosophy, I just found this to be a little incongruent, right?
yeah,
He's talking about, how effective the 22 is if you hit an aortic arch, and he showed that little picture and everything. And, the aortic arch is literally the width of your finger,
yeah,
right? We're not even talking about the heart as a whole. We're talking about this little area that the aortic arch runs through. And he makes the point that how effective a 22 can be if you hit somebody in the aortic arch. Completely agree. But that goes back to that initial stipulation that a 22 in the heart or the aortic arch or the cranium, that's going to be pretty effective, right? Combat effective. That person or that threat may not terminate from it, but I'm going to say there's a pretty high probability that whatever aggressive behavior they have is done at that point, right?
yeah,
But yet, when we look at let's look at our law enforcement community. Like, what do we teach our guys? We're happy if we can just get center mass hits, right? We're not even talking about um, aortic arches or heart. Like, and I know you and I, when we teach combative classes, we tighten up that standard and we push upper center mass, high center mass. And I think even Steve said something about, we'd rather the shots be higher than lower, right? So we're even trying to push a a smaller effective combat area so we can be more effective, right? And then when we look at our national hit percentages from our most highly trained people that we put in our community, which are police officers. Now, I think over the last couple of years, it's gotten better, but it's still woefully low when we look at our hit percentages.
yeah,
And so we're looking at this philosophy of, well, I'm going to take this little 22 because if I hit them in the aortic arch, it's going to be just as effective. I'm like, yeah, I agree. that will be. But how effective can a person who, by their own very admission and nature, isn't going to train, isn't going to practice, doesn't care about any of this stuff, has no idea about inoculation to stress, and we're telling them we're going to want you to hit this, when we tell the protectors of society, we just want you to hit anywhere up in here, and we still don't have a high percentage of that. What's how realistic are we being to expect a person to hit something that wide? How far away? You know, I'm a tend to think I'm a pretty decent shot, and I know you are. But if we put a hot dog on a piece of paper vertically and we say, "All right, I want you to stand at 7 yards and hit the hot dog," yeah, we might hit it, we might not. We come really close, but it's when once again the philosophy of the 22 is effective if I can hit this. But now I come out and I say, okay, well, the contrarian side to that is how can you effectively hit that when you don't train, you're not going to practice, you're not going to come back. Even the most highly trained shooters that we know, high level competition shooters, you put that little hot dog size thickness on a target and say, okay, you've got 1.5 seconds. Give me a draw or give me a mount and snap shoot that thing.
Okay, that's the next big YouTube shooting challenge right there.
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
hot dogs on a stick. Let's
The
see.
hot dog challenge.
Yeah.
So it just,
I'm picturing people out there who are like, I'm gonna make it hard. I'm doing this little cheap little red dye hot dog versus a Nathan's, big nice
right, because
jumbo.
that's
Yeah.
that's that's that's
Yeah.
the aortic arch drill. You know what we're gonna he's probably gonna totally like kick me in the balls when he sees me, but I'm gonna be like, this is now the Moses drill. The Moses drill is you gotta hit a hot dog at 7 yards.
Oh, this is coming at the next HackCon and maybe the cognitive conclave. I can see it
Yeah.
now.
And once again, Steve, I've never met you, but I have tremendous respect for what you're doing and
Yeah.
your opinion. So please take this in the spirit of fun that it is. And
Right. And again, this is not an Eric piling on. I should have tried to arrange it where I could get both of them on here at the same time, but I'm a government employee. I'm doing the best I can.
yeah, so yeah, I just see a little bit of disconnect between the philosophy of what we're asking these hesitant shooters to do
Mhm.
with the reality that we know as instructors and what we're telling them they need to be able to do. And so I found that to be a little disconnected. When I first heard this before I flew home and got my little Cheeto state figures going, and then of course Chuck talked about the 22 and the ballistics
Yeah.
of it and this and that. The one thing I found interesting was, um, and why I don't recommend the 22. Once again, I agree it's better than nothing, and it's not ideal, and all those things we stipulated to is,
Mhm.
um, and I was I kind of knew it, but because you and I never really deal with 22s as a viable um, defense round. You know, at least for me personally, I never really got into the ballistic gel tests and how it performs because it was off my radar. It was just
Mhm.
you know, it's nothing I'm ever going to recommend. It's nothing. So I was actually a little surprised to hear some of Chuck's information about how the 22s are ricocheting off bone. And I would think, well, if it's got enough penetration energy to get through a ballistic gel, 12, 16 inches, you would think it would have enough energy to get through a bone, a femur. And how many times he talked about in his research, his knowledge that it would glance off and it would ricochet, do this. And so that comes back to, well, yeah, any any combat effective hit with a 22, and we talked about in the heart and things there, it's going to do it. Um, but it's not that ideal hit. You know, you hit somebody in a bone with a 380 or a 9 millimeter or a 32, H&R. Chances are it's going to shatter that bone. Where a 22 hits it and ricochets, So now we're looking at it, not necessarily the ballistic efficiency of that 22, the terminal efficiency. You know, that 380 hitting somebody in a hip and breaking a hip, is it necessarily going to stop that fight? No. But if you hit somebody with a 22 and it ricochets down their hip, they're still mobile. It may sting if they even feel it, right? But you hit them with 380 or a 9 and it shatters that hip. Once again, they may not feel it, but when they go to try to stand on it, that bone structural support has been destroyed. No matter how motivated they are, there's no bone there to support them if they want to keep fighting. So when I look at this and I think about the 22, right? If it's not an ideal hit, now how far of a drop off do we have on the efficacy of a 22 versus a slightly larger caliber? A 380, a 32, right? I see there's so much more effectiveness of a round that's just a little bit bigger, that's just a little bit more trade off in energy and recoil and cost and all those things. But I think if we plotted this on some type of a curve, you would see that the next step up from a 22 is going to be a big jump in the efficacy. Yeah, I can't even say it right. In the effectiveness of a hit, right? That's not an ideal hit, but may increase the chances that whatever that threat is going to stop being a threat. So um, once again, I don't favor that 22, not necessarily because it can't be effective and terminal in the right spot, but because if it's not in the right spot, does it do anything more than a thin screwdriver? You know, and so that comes in, and then we haven't got into all the things you guys touched upon. 22 ammo is dirty. 22 ammo is oily. I mean, think about these people that go and take a 22 and put it in a drawer or put it in a closet or put it somewhere, and they're not going to touch it for a year. I mean, you and I know what some of these officers' guns look like after 3 months in a holster that they've never touched, and the dust bunnies and the French fries and the Twinkies that come out of the holster with the gun. You know, what is sitting in a closet or sitting somewhere, the amount of dust and debris that's going to attach itself to sticky ammo, oily ammo, and just everything that once again, these people are not going to pull this out until they absolutely need it. Right? And then they're not even going to shoot until they absolutely last resort because they're hesitant. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
But then when they get to that point, they pull the trigger and maybe it doesn't work. Maybe they only get the one round because they didn't do the maintenance of pulling this thing out every 3 to 6 months and just wiping off the magazine, wiping off some ammo, making sure that the dust that got in the barrel in the chamber didn't clog it. An interesting thing, and I know I'm rattling stuff off, but it's just I had a big list. and, uh, and the interesting thing I would ask Chuck about is the long-term storage. We know from centerfire pistol and centerfire rifle that primers are good as long as they're stored properly for a long time. We have ammo from World War II that still works. How does that work with the priming compound on a 22? Does it degrade faster? If I put a 22 rimfire in the drawer for 2 years, do I have to worry about that primer compound in the rim? Does it need a harder smack to ignite because it breaks down quicker? Because there's less of it because it's such a small round? It'd be interesting from his perspective to see, what's that information on how long is the priming compound on a 22 still good, which relates to how often am I rotating my ammo type thing.
I know that in the 1980s, I found some ammo that had been stored in a dairy barn decades prior, and it still functioned. And again, some of it was 22.
Yeah.
Uh, and when I say decades prior, some of it was going back. It was in Peters Victor's ammo boxes. And for the
Oh yeah,
audience, Peters Victor's became Remington Peters, which then became just straight up Remington. So that tells you how old some of this ammo was.
yeah. That's a history lesson. It was probably worth more to a collector than it was to shoot it.
I did put together some complete boxes because there were several boxes that were partial, and I made like a couple of complete boxes out of a couple of them. At least as a preteen, I was smart enough to do that. But the rest of it got shot up, and yeah,
Yeah, you know, it's a the same thing with this hesitant shooter, right?
yeah.
So he shows up for this class, or they show up for the class. They shoot it, whatever, and then they ask a question, like Chuck and Steve said, "Hey, what ammo should I put in this gun?" Right? And Chuck did an awesome job going through his reasoning for pistols and revolvers and subcompact and why you want to choose and hollow points. Awesome. Right? So we tell these people, "Hey, you need, you know, whatever this 22 ammo is. You know, this is the for your rifle or handgun. This is the stuff to get." Can we rely on these people to actually go and put in the effort to find it versus walking to a gun store that they're probably not comfortable with because of who they are and they're hesitant? And do they just grab something else and say, "Oh, this is just a hollow point's good enough"? Or worse yet, the community being our own worst enemy, they go up to the guy at the counter and says, "Hey, I'm looking for this type of 22," and he slaps some super expensive, "Oh no, this is way better. This is what you need," right? And sells them a bill of sale and sells them and says, "Yeah, yeah, no, no, this is it. This is the newest fancy stuff. Yeah, it costs, but you're only going to buy this one box. This is what you need." And they never put it through their gun to see if it's going to work, right? Because they're just going to shove their magazine, they're going to put it in the drawer, and they're not going to do anything with it. And then the time comes they need it, they get one round in the gun jams. Or, and once again, this kind of training intersection is there was a little blurb on there that Steve and you guys were talking about how leaving the guns cruiser ready, right? Which for our audience is, magazine full, chamber empty, shotguns, this and that. Well, in that training, you're doing your snap shooting, you're getting safeties on and off, but are you training these people from cruiser ready to work the bolt and then take the safety off? Because these are hesitant shooters. You're not going to convince them to leave the gun on fire, right? They're going to want the safety on. So are we remembering to teach them cruiser ready to work the bolt and then take the safety off and go? Or are we just doing safeties because we're taking the guns loaded? So once again, it'd be interesting to see, does he require them on this class to show up with the ammo that they want to put in the gun for defense ammo? So at least for a 2-hour block, they get some idea of the reliability and the functionability of that ammo in that gun. Or they just ask and they go out and we hope that they pick up what we recommend because we're the experts. Or do they go somewhere and somebody convinces them to buy something else because it's better, but they never try it, they never function test it?
I submit that you would have that very same problem with centerfire as well, though.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, because once again, that comes back to that person, right? That comes back to that hesitant shooter, and that comes back to the very first thing we talked about, which is, you can't save everybody. If this guy's not willing, or this person isn't willing to put in a minimum amount of effort, are we doing them a disservice by giving them that little 4-hour block, knowing that they're not going to come back, as opposed to saying, "Hey, look, this is a 4-hour block, but you really need more than this. And I'd love to work with you, but I'm going to need a 2 or 3 class commitment for you to come back. Now, you can come back a month from now." And of course, there's no way we can enforce that. But if you're going to sit here and tell me that, "Hey, I just want to learn how to be safe. And if somebody kicks in my door, I just want to know that I can shoot them, legally, and that I have a gun to do it." As an instructor, what is my responsibility to say, "Hey, I understand your needs and I understand what you're looking for, but I'm not the guy for you." There's plenty of other instructors that'll do that for you. but here's the downside of what's going to happen. And I'd love to work with you, but I can't get you what you want in just this little class. You're going to have to go find somebody else.
All right. Well, I know Steve lives in Texas and I'm in Georgia. The only logical conclusion is that next August we come spend several weeks at your place in Montana and test everything we can about 22s for a while.
You know what? There's in between Shot Show and the conferences, we can probably get some sponsors. You know, between Athens and Missoula, we can probably find some little tech guy that wants to be in the video field, and we can get some YouTube videos out of. I'm
Uh,
happy to do that. Yeah, happy to commit to that. And because I know we this hadn't come up before, but lately I've been doing a lot of work back in the shotgun side, and I've been
okay.
doing a lot of um, testing and configuring and choke testing on all the stuff. So I'm kind of getting back into the gauge because apparently after 15 years of rifle, people are bored of M4s, and
Right.
everyone now seems to be the shotgun seems to be gaining popularity again. So
As you and I have said several times on the range, eventually people are going to realize that shotguns are good for shooting people again.
right, yeah, eventually people are going to realize that the brutality of a shotgun across the room is unmatched.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I've been messing with that a little bit, but yeah, oh, happy to have you. Come on out. We've got the short range, we've got the long range out here. We can do it all,
Uh,
I mean, day and
yeah.
night and everything. But yeah, so I guess the overlying thing that I just want to take exception was is or take exception's a strong phrase. Just bring to light, have a discussion about is um, can as instructors can we really be effective with a hesitant shooter on such a small block with what we're asking them to be able to do, knowing that by their own definition, by their own thing, they're not going to put any more effort in than just this 4 hour class. And then how effective is that? And you could make that argument with anything. I
Yeah.
mean, on the equipment side, right? Because it's not an equipment issue. You could make this argument with 9mm, 5.56, with shotgun.
Mhm.
If you want to come to a 4 hour class and 2 hours of actual trigger time, and that's it, and you want to put it in your gun or you're in your house and say, man, anyone ever kicks open the door, 18 years from now, I'm good to go. I'm going to grab this thing and get to work.
Yeah.
You know, doesn't matter what it is. So the philosophy of that, it's good to get these people out here, but as an instructor, what's our responsibility to go to these people that have this mentality, these hesitant shooters, and be like, hey, I can't get you what you want. I need a better commitment from you, and I'm happy to work with you, but if you can't commit to me more than just a 4 hour block, then you you need to go find someone else you know
Mhm.
And so that's that thing. So it'd be interesting to, like I said, get Steve's take on that and see where he's at, because this sounds like this is really in his lane, and he's been effective with this, and he's had great classes. Obviously, he's traveling around the country, so there's an interest in this. So there's a lot of I expect a rebuttal. That's
Oh,
some
how about a discussion rather than a rebuttal?
Yeah, no,
I think we can have a respectful discussion on the topic.
absolutely,
Carl
absolutely.
and Ernest Langdon proved that we can have differing opinions.
I
And
haven't seen that one yet, but
uh,
that actually is the next one up. Yeah.
uh, well, that is a segue into the next thing we're going to talk about. Because, folks, Eric and I, for years, we have a running text thing about different guns, different pistols, and everything. Because I guess what we've been buddy since what, about 2013,
At least I'd
something
have to go
somewhere in
back
there.
and I've still got that certificate from down
Yeah,
in from that class somewhere.
yeah,
Going through all my stuff, what I was throwing out. Yeah, I want to say it
yeah,
was probably
yeah.
2012, 2013 time frame.
I know 2013 was the first time we put it on the class together. Well, I helped get the range for you and everything, and it was a
Right.
student in the class. So the class where we first met would have been prior to that.
Yeah.
So 2012ish, somewhere around in there.
Yeah, it was the
And
ILFE class we went to
mhm,
with
yeah,
Mike Can't remember.
Mike Doyle,
Mike Boyle.
Boyle,
Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah,
there were several other guys that were involved in that, but he was
yeah,
the lead
yeah.
guy. Um, Great story from that class. Eric and I didn't know each other at the time. Uh, yeah, we're just two guys that signed up for the same class. And we wound up standing next to each other on the firing line. They divided the class up into pistol, rifle, and shotgun. And you're going to do one day on pistol, one day on rifle, and one day on shotgun. Well, on the very first day, we got put in the pistol group. We're on the line right next to each other. And to start the class off, the instructor comes down and he's running. Basically, it's Ty Green's fast, but this guy called it the Crucible, and we shot it on ILFE targets instead of the 3x5 and the 8 inch. And I'm getting a lot of feedback all of a sudden. Okay, sounds like it's dying off now. And so he comes down the line, and Eric and I were at the very end of the line. We're going to be the last couple of shooters, and the Angels were in my holster that day. And I burned that thing down, and I beat Eric. I think I did it in like 3.85 or something like that.
Right.
It was below 4. Now, folks, I'm not claiming that I had a 3 something fast. This was on an ILFE target, so 4-inch circle, not a 3x5 card, and we were doing it at 5 yards and not 7.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did it in 3 something and beat Eric. And as we're walking back to load up ammo for the next drill, and I knew his name. I knew his name, but I had never met him before. And he's like, "Well, I didn't know I was going to have any wily gunfighters in this class." I'm like, "Well, hey, look, dude, I'm not a GM." And it started right then. And we have been poking fun at each other and having fun with gun conversations and stuff from the like. And so he's one of the people that I go to when I have gun questions. Hey, I'm looking at hammer fired nines or the like. Um, so lately I've been on this kick of maybe I should give the 2011 a try, but I'm not going to do the crazy 60 and $70 magazines and everything. So I kind of narrowed it down to, okay, I'm going to try the Stealth Arms Platypus and I'm going to try the Staccato HD. That's kind of where I was looking. I got a chance to shoot them head to head on a range here recently, and I've decided that neither one of them's the answer. Um, and I know you recently tried the DWX pistol, and you told me that was the best 2011 class 9mm out there on the market. So, so take it away. Talk 2011 for us.
Yeah, and I'll stand by that. So, obviously, with at this point, a lifetime and over a million documented rounds through 1911, 2011 single action type setups, I'm very partial to the platform. And uh, I built them. I know my way around them pretty confidently. And man, they're great pistols. I would classify them, and I don't know where I heard this phrase, so I can't give the credit it's due. But I did not originate this phrase. Is that a 1911? And when we talk about 2011s, it includes 1911s, the single stacks, the high caps, basically any 1911, 2011 single action type platform. Is They are the phrase I heard is they're an enthusiast pistol. They're not necessarily a duty pistol. A Glock's a duty pistol. You put it in your holster, it's going to run. 2011s, 1911s, they're more of an enthusiast gun, right? You have to want to shoot these guns. You have to kind of know about them. You have to learn how to make them run. You have to learn to be able to diagnose if you're having problems. Now, having said that, they can be marvelously and wonderfully, high level performers. They can be, dare I say, as reliable as a Glock, right? And all you have to do is look at high level competition shooters in that competition world. These guys are running that platform, and that platform has dominated competition shooting since the 70s. I mean, we're in 50 years of competition that the single action platforms still dominate because of the triggers, because of how they can perform, the accuracy, the upgrades, everything with them. but they're still an enthusiast gun. And so you never really saw a lot of them in the law enforcement community except for special operations unit. But Staccato, to their credit, has really kind of shifted the paradigm on that. Staccato was the first ones to really dial into the 9mm in that platform and really, work with the magazines, because the magazines are always the issue, right, with the 1911 platform. And you can make that argument with any platform. The heart of reliability in any platform is going to be the magazine. If the magazine can't do what it needs to do, the pistol ain't going to run, no matter how well built it is, or a rifle. So magazines have always been the problem. All right. Well, recently, Dan Wesson came out with, and I say recent, the last couple of years, the DWX, their version of a 2011, which I just happen to have here, and I brought for studio purposes. So this is the Dan Wesson, right? And it's basically a hybrid of a CZ75 grip module and the ergonomics of a CZ75 with the action of a 2011. And that platform is quickly become my newest favorite, right? The problem with the 2011 platforms has always been the magazines, right? And I brought some more training aids to show you, because when you look at the quick evolution, a 1911 was built around a 45 ACP, right? Which is a certain length.
Mhm.
Well, when they started running the next caliber that they introduced into a 1911 platform was a 38 Super, which for people who aren't familiar with it, it's basically just a long 9mm. Think of it like 38 special versus 357. Right?
It's 9 by 23, isn't it?
Yes. Well, technically, I think it's a 9 by 23 and a half.
Okay.
But yeah, it's basically 9 by 23 versus 9 by 19. But the reason for that was they needed to make the round the same length as a 45, which is 1.260. So they made that case longer. Now, of course, when you made the case, they crammed in more powder, made it basically a plus P plus 9mm. But the reason they did that, even though the 9mm was around for 20, 25 years, was because the magazines for 1911s were set for a certain length to fit the 45 into it.
Mhm.
So they basically said, we want a 9mm, we need to make it the same length so it'll function. So they made 38 Super and they made it long. So the problem is, fast forward 50 years, 60 years, and now everyone's trying to run 9mm, right? Well, here's your problem. And let me get my training aid, is when you look at a 9mm round, of course, when I drop it, when you look at the 9mm compared to the 45,
Raise it up a little higher. There you go. It's in.
you can see the 9mm is shorter.
Folks, for the on the listening to this audio, he's got a board with a 9mm and a 45 setting on the cartridge head side by side, so you can see the difference in the length.
So what I've got here is, this is just an STI mag, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we put the 9mm in, actually that one's not going to work right. Let me see if I can make this work. Yeah, it's not going to work. So I didn't grab the right magazine. But essentially what ends up happening is you have a lot of space from the nose of the 9mm
Mm-hmm.
to the feed ramp in there, because the 9mm is shorter. So it's got a much longer way to go before the nose of the bullet hits the feed ramp and starts to feed. So we solved this problem in the competition world years ago, right? And so what we did when the high cap started coming out and we had reliability problems, a lot of guys ran supers, but then guys wanted to run 9mm because it was cheaper, factory ammo, you could practice with all the benefits of it. But we always had problems with reliability. Well, the fix to this was, if you notice, like, this is your STI mag, right? And that's still, these dimensions were still built for a 45. So what we needed to do was they came up with this little thing here, and this is a spacer. And what this thing does is it goes in the bottom of the magazine, and let me see if I can get you an angle there. And it takes up a little bit of that space so that now when I put the 9 millimeter in there, if I can keep this in there, that 9 millimeter is closer, and we take up that extra length where the 45 is longer and the 9 millimeter shorter.
Mhm.
So we've had these things for years. And I can tell you, if you have a problem with feeding with 9 millimeters in your 2011 platform, if you get into the competition community, or you just do a Google search, look for 9 millimeter spacers. And this spacer is designed to go in this magazine to take up that space. And then when you do that, this mag has the spacer in it. If you notice now that the nose of the 45, or excuse me, the nose of the 9 is where it should be in relation to the front of the mag. So as soon as we started putting spacers in to take up that extra width, guns started feeding better. Pistols start working a lot better. And so what you'll see now is some people have internal spacers. Um, they do a bunch of different things, but Staccato has done a great job redesigning the magazines to fit the taper and everything. So now 9 millimeter pistols from the factory and the 2011 platforms have been pretty reliable. They're getting very, very good. And of course, now everybody is making a 2011. Well, going back to the Dan Wesson, the reason why I think this thing is superior and why it's kind of my favorite right now is, one, I don't think anyone will argue that the CZ75 grip isn't extremely ergonomic,
Mhm.
right? It fits your hand very well. But the nice thing is that this platform was designed around 9 millimeter from the beginning. So this is just a CZ P10 magazine that goes with the P10 striker fired pistol. The Dan Wesson uses them, and it's just a purpose built, factory built 9 millimeter magazine that you get with any 9 millimeter gun, a SIG, a Glock, an M&P. These magazines were specifically designed for nothing but 9 millimeter. They were never converted. So there's an inherent reliability in this platform that I think you get that you don't get with the 2011s, because those magazines were all designed. Now we can make them work, but if you want a setup where you want to be able to just go to a store and buy something, I could make the argument that the Dan Wesson, the DWX, single action, marvelously accurate, has the same exact trigger. A lot of the parts between 2011s and the Dan Wesson are interchangeable, and it uses cheap CZP10 magazines. They're interchangeable. So this is a standard factory round with a 2 base pad. That's a 21 round magazine, and it's designed like that. So I can get 21 rounds in that magazine. I never have to mess with anything. It's a platform that's designed around it. It's a single action platform, has the same trigger, same accuracy. You can mount the red dots on direct thread, and mount them right to the slide. And I've been thrilled to death with it. It really shoots well and performs. And so I would, if you're in that market, um, I could make an argument and say, take a look at the Dan Wesson at literally half the price of what you're going to pay for a Staccato. But that's also, coming back to Staccatos, why you see this push for running with Glock mags. Well, one, they're cheaper, and but the real kind of reason behind that is those magazines were designed around the 9 millimeter. You don't have your spacing problems, you don't have your feeding problems. They're cheap, they're a known quantity, they're designed for 9, and they feed. The problem is, making a 2011 take Glock mags, but that's why you're seeing it. And I think Staccato's done a good job, and I think Platypus is getting there. As far as their product, I don't have a lot of experience with it, but for what I've seen, they seem to be Most of them seem to be working pretty good, but occasionally you see a little problem here or there. But I think that's why you're seeing a lot of these manufacturers now try to make magazines work with a Glock mag. Right. Well, you can get that same benefit from going with the Dan Wesson at half the price of what you're going to pay for a staccato.
What optic cuts on that damn Wesson full size?
So I think that's an RMR cut because I've got a hollow sun on it, and I think
Okay.
they interchange. So it's
Yeah.
a an RMR side cut.
Okay.
I happen to this is the 507C, so it's the competition with the slightly bigger window.
Okay.
And it's just me personal preference. I'm Holosun has really upped their game, and I'm very happy with all the Holosun products. Primarily because I am a circle dot guy, like the EOTech reticles,
Hmm.
and I'm a green guy. I like green better than red. And EOTech, or excuse me, Holosun has been offering the widest variety of optics for all their platforms. They offer that green circle dot, which is what I prefer. So I end up with Holosun more than anything at this point.
Yeah. For some reason, I was thinking that you had to have plates to mount onto the damn Wessons.
So this one has a plate um, on there,
Okay.
and I don't remember which one it is, but I think you're going to find that a lot of your manufacturers are going the plate route because there's no standardization in the
Yeah.
footprints that they want to be able to offer a pistol that'll cover any footprint. And so, the only way to do that, but I want to say the Dan Wesson, I'd have to look and don't quote me on this. I want to think you can direct mount it, but then they also offer plates if you have a different footprint, some version of that. But I've been happy with it. It hasn't come loose. I've witness marked it, and I'm well over 1,000 rounds on that one. And yeah, it's been rolling great, and I've been happy with it. But yeah, coming back to the initial thing about just the 2011s in general is yeah, you need to be a little bit of an enthusiast about them. There's so many aftermarket parts, so many things you can do to customize them, and not just the optics. I mean, just so much stuff out there. You have to put in a little time and effort if you really are looking for a platform that you just want to take and shoot and occasionally clean and not really put any thought into it. I think there's probably ever some other choices, but if you put in the time and effort, the level of performance you can get out of a 1911 2011 platform for you as an individual, I don't think there's any other pistol platform that can maximize your performance like one of those platforms can.
Yeah. Of course, I went down heavy on the P10C route, as you know, and I think I'm
I know
responsible.
you suckered me down that road,
I,
and I am now down the P10 route.
yeah, I think I'm responsible for you having a P10F.
You
Uh,
are, and yeah, and the only reason I don't have my P10C yet is
yeah,
because of my retirement pistol, and it's been tough to justify
yeah.
buying the same exact P10C when I have a nice Glock 19. But
Because here's the thing that I don't understand why Dan Wesson did what they did. The full size DWX takes the P10F magazine. The DWX compact, you would think, okay, we'll make it take the P10C mag. No, they made it take the CZ75 compact mag. And so either way I go, if I get the full size Dan Wesson, well, now I got to go buy a bunch of P10F mags. And of course, granted, those would work in my C's. Or if I go buy the Dan Wesson X compact, now I got to go buy a bunch of 75X mags. Um, I love the way the gun feels. I've handled both of them, everything else. But I was like, okay, if I do this, I've got holsters, I got mags that I got to do, I got everything else. So I kind of set it aside. And the other thing with that is while I can outshoot my Glocks with my CZP10Cs, it's not even close. I can outshoot my Glocks with it. I've run into reliability issues with my P10C.
really,
Yeah. Now, one of them I'll take the blame for, and I know some of the audience has heard this already. Uh, I pushed the magazine, excuse me, the recoil spring assemblies too long. And I was packing to go to a class. I said, you know what? When I get back from this class, I need to order new recoil springs. And that was the kiss of death because you know what happened in that class? Recoil spring.
Because as soon as you spoke it,
Yeah, recoil springs happen. I was shooting a club match here a few weeks ago, and all of a sudden, the magazine just kept falling out of my gun. And so either, let's hope, the $5 mag catch spring has gone bad and replacing that will fix it, or it's a $60 mag catch to
right,
fix it. Well, the guns now sell for sub $400.
right, yeah,
Yeah, $60 for the mag catch just seems extreme. And running into both of those, like I said, I didn't hold the recoil spring assembly against the gun. I'm a little miffed over the mag catch thing. And because like, all right, now this is two times where this is suddenly this pistol's let me down. Can I keep trusting the platform? And so that's kind of turned me off to the Dan Wesson as well, because they're CZ and Dan Wesson are the same company.
right,
Um, am I going to run into those type issues? So that's what kind of got me focused on looking at the Staccato HDs and the Platypus from Stealth Arms. Um, I shot a Staccato 4.5 and the Staccato 4, and I don't like the grips on either of them.
hmm,
And I'm not happy with the fact that if I go with an optic like an acro, I've got to put a plate on the gun.
right,
I'm just anti-plate. For any,
hmm,
range gun, I don't care, but if I'm going to be carrying it for social purposes, I don't want to plate on.
right,
So the platypus you can order in whatever configuration you want, and so I got to looking at those. I did shoot a 5-inch model that somebody else had and was fairly impressed with it. Um, got to looking at it, it's like, all right, I'm usually a shorter slide guy, so I'm thinking commander length slide with direct cut for an acro. Well, I
hmm,
got a chance last week to shoot the HD4 and the commander length platypus head to head on the range.
hmm,
And there, I got to tell you, I don't see basically the cost of 4 Glocks plus holsters plus optics. I don't see enough of potential performance gain to justify spending the money for me. For me.
right. So
Uh,
the only thing I would offer up on that is, and this comes back to performance, right? Is and I learned this through competition
mm-hmm,
was that when you look at and you're gauging your performance, is that when you do something new, whether it's a technique or
mm-hmm,
a piece of equipment, your performance will always dip a little
yeah,
bit because you don't have the familiarity with it. And so, what I would just offer up in that is that one session enough to really make a definitive statement that says, "Well, I don't notice any any improvement enough." The first thing is define is you have to define is, well, what kind of improvement am I looking for? Am I looking for better accuracy, better follow up, better, I can now more effectively engage at 50 yards versus 25. What's that performance metric that I'm hoping to attain by going to this other piece of equipment? The other thing is you look at um, what will this piece of equipment do for me? Um, I guess the best way to say it is I never want to be in a position where I'm better than my equipment, right? We see that a lot in rifle and long range rifle. You know,
mm-hmm,
I know from my skill levels that I can shoot a half-minute group on a precision rifle. Well, I want a rifle that's capable of me maximizing my performance, right? It does me no good to know that I can shoot a half minute or a half inch at 100 yards if the rifle and equipment will only shoot 2 inches. So now the equipment's limiting my performance, and I can't get from being a half-inch shooter to a quarter-inch shooter because my equipment can't let me get there.
yeah,
And it's the same like with pistol. Like I want to know that I can keep everything in an A zone at 25 yards. Well, I know I have the skill to do that, but I don't have the confidence, or let me say, I have more confidence that I can do that with my 2011 than I can do it with my Glock for various factors. So when you look at that and you ask yourself, am I really gaining that much performance for you or for me? It becomes sometimes it's not only just about performance itself, raw performance, it's about margin of error, right? The 2011 and the 1911 platforms, they give me a larger margin of error that I can be a little sloppy on that trigger and maybe still get the hit I want to get because of the accuracy of the platform or because the crispness, I don't even know if that's a word, for how because of how clean the trigger breaks,
Right.
right? A nice 3 pound trigger versus a mushy 5.5 connector, right? I may not be able to have the margin for error on that connector. And if I get a little sloppy with that Glock, I'm absolutely going to put it in the CD zone. Where if I get a little sloppy on that 2011, I might put it on the AC line, but it's still an A, right? So it's not just quantifiable. Did I shoot faster or am I more accurate? It's also that platform gives me a larger margin for error where I can not be as perfect as I need to be, but still get the hit I want because of the performance of that platform.
Yeah, I'll say that some of the issue was might have been I've dabbled with 1911s over the years. Never really been a what I would call a 1911 guy. Matter of fact, a running joke with one of the big name guys around this area that you would know um, is anytime my people would go train with him at his shop, he would always tell them, "Hey, I heard you guys are going to go to 1911s," because he knew I was not a 1911 guy. So they come back and ask me, "Hey, David said that we were going to 1911s. Is that true?" And I said, "No, we're not going to carry something that weighs twice as much and carries half as many." And it was a running joke that every time I knew one of my guys had been to the training center because they'd come back and ask me about where we're going to 1911s. I don't like the blade trigger. Give me a hinge trigger. And I know that's backwards to what everybody else out there says. I've got so much more time on the hinge triggers that it feels natural to me, and the blade trigger just feels wrong.
Yeah, I'll offer up the the same sentiments, but
Mm-hmm.
a different example is the first. Let me say, probably the first 13, 14, 15 years of my 30-year law enforcement career, I had SIGs,
Yeah.
double singles. Now I had shot Glocks, shot them in competition, had them personally. Then my agency transition, we went to Glocks. But I will take a double single trigger over a striker trigger any day because of how clean even a Beretta, a Sig, an old school Smith and Wesson 5906s, whatever those is, just whatever I I will take that over the mushiness of a Glock. Doesn't mean I can't shoot them, but you put two on the table, you put a 17 and a 226 on the table, I'm grabbing the 226, right? Because I can manage that double action pull. And then when I get
Yeah.
to the single action, I can get to work, you know. But yeah, so I mean, it's the
Yeah.
same thing. I guess I think that
Yeah.
comes back to what you knew, what you grew up on. I started shooting competition when I was 22. I shot competition for 2 years before I even got into the law enforcement community. So, and those first 2 years were Glocks, right? And single action, that kind of trigger, and then shortly thereafter, had to get a para ordnance, high capacity, taking competition seriously, and so a million plus rounds later in single actions, single action triggers, flat triggers, blade triggers. That's just where I feel comfortable.
Yeah.
But we go to duty guns. Yeah, I'm a, I'm a, I'm a double single guy.
Well, this may lead down to me getting a Langdon Beretta of some description, or like a Sig 226 Elite or something like that. because I was a double single guy for my first 7 years on the job. It was by policy, not by choice. Uh, I kind of shudder at all the people that like talk about third generation Smiths now, like in positive terms. Like,
No, no, no.
no, no, I have the two that I carried on duty for nostalgia purposes only. I do not glow fondly or reminisce fondly about the third generation Smith. But I do like double single. If I could get a double single pistol with the ergonomics that I wanted, I would probably jump all over that. And I'm thinking maybe try a PX4 compact carry from
Right.
Langdon. But again, before we got on air, I spec'd one out, and that's like $2,000 with the optic and everything. And then you got to add the holsters and stuff on top of that, and magazines and everything else. I would want a chance to play with one before I put the
Yeah.
money down on that. But as all of this is going on, a couple of weeks ago, a local club did an outlaw Glock match. When I say outlaw Glock match, it was they used GSSF stages, but you could shoot anything you wanted to.
Hmm.
And I showed up with a Shadow Systems XR 920, which is basically Glock 45
Right.
with the Shadow. And the reason I have it was because it was direct mail for an acro. And how did I get it? Legally. That's all I'll say. Um, I beat the second place shooter by 19 seconds. And the second place shooter is a local area agency instructor who has done a lot of big time training.
Hmm.
Now, part of the reason that I may have beaten him by such a wide margin was he decided, you know what, I'm going to run my Staccato P today instead of the Glock
Hmm.
that he carries every day on duty. And I think it backfired on him a little bit.
Right.
For the same like I'm talking about the blade trigger
Hmm.
messes me up. If he had spent a few weeks practicing with that Staccato P and come out there, I don't think there would have been a 19-second difference between the two of us.
Yeah. When you're talking about the triggers and like performance and everything, like for me, inside 20 yards, I don't see any performance gain from a striker to a double single
Right.
for me personally.
No.
Where I notice it is when I have to start making more precision shots. Call
Mm-hmm.
me a trigger snob.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I'm used to those things, but having the cleaner breaking trigger on a double single, I perform better and I can
Yeah.
be more accurate than I can with the Glocks. Now, having said that, there are a lot of just now excellent striker fire triggers. Like that's one of the things I love about the CZs, the P10s, is that trigger is night and day over a Glock trigger.
Oh yeah.
Um, the Walthers, the PDPs, those triggers are great. The Canics, those triggers are great. For a striker fire gun.
Yeah.
So when I say and give this example, it wasn't strikers across the board. It was specifically Glocks
Mm-hmm.
that, and sometimes you get Glock triggers that aren't bad, and then sometimes you get some that are really mushy.
Yeah.
And for me, over 20 yards or when I needed a high level of precision, I was able to perform better with a better trigger. And so the double action SIGs, the double action Berettas, I get that over that Glock system. You know.
The two reasons I shoot the P10C better than the 19 is one, the trigger is demonstrably better on the P10C, and then the grip angle um, is less extreme.
Yes.
And I don't have to be as exactingly perfect on my presentation with the P10 as I do with the Glock.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. Completely agree. That's always been my complaint with Glocks with me.
yeah,
Is obviously 2011s point very naturally.
yeah,
And Glocks always point high for me. And I found that that's one of the other reasons I love the CZs and the
mhm,
P10s is the grips are more ergonomic, they're thinner, they're not blocky,
yeah,
but more importantly, that gun points the way I need it to point, and I
yeah,
don't have to work to get the gun to point where I want it to.
yeah.
Same thing.
I've looked at the PDPs some. My hesitation with them is that they are a fully tensioned striker,
Hmm.
and whereas the Glock and the CZs are not fully tensioned strikers. and so
Yeah, I
there is some take up on the striker springs when you take
I,
precision.
I I haven't shot the Walthers. I've
Yeah,
only played with them at shot show and conventions where I've
yeah,
feel the triggers and
yeah,
mess with them. But yeah, I mean that would be a
yeah.
that's a valid concern. Yeah.
And so I would love double single. Would absolutely love it if I can get one there with the ergonomics that I wanted. And I was thinking maybe the PO7, excuse me, the PO9 Nocturne. But then I started running into these problems with my P10, and I was like, well, there goes that. I don't know that
Right.
that I can trust the gun because I would have had magazine interchangeability and everything else. All I would have had to done was picked up um, another holster.
Right. In a weird kind of a way,
Yeah,
I'm doing it's like the same fight, but
yeah,
with a different platform. Because obviously, I like the SIGs. That's what I grew up
hmm,
on. 226, man, my hand was just made for
yeah,
that gun, right? But of course, double single triggers. So what was ideal? Man, if I could get a single action only 226, that would be awesome. And then what happens? The 226 Legions comes out single action
yeah,
only.
yeah,
And if I've got to do an LE class, I'm
yeah,
going to be running the 226, not the Glock,
yeah.
because now I just get the single action I want, but I get it in a duty style gun and I get a 1911 platform, familiarity with the single action. And so for me, yeah, it's that same thing
Yeah.
you're talking about, just different platforms. Like, how can I get rid of the double action? Because all I really want's the single action on a double single platform. I know I'll go with the single action version of the double single platform.
See, I'd be willing to give up the single action to get the double action that I wanted.
Oh, blasphemy.
Uh, Ernest, Carl, you'll hear this when you've watched that episode. Give me a magazine fed K frame revolver, and I'd be happy.
Right, right. You want a high cap revolver. That's what
Yeah.
you
Um, I looked at the Legion SIGs, and I'm not confident with the thumb safety on that gun. Well, my ability to get it consistently. I did dry fire a 226 Elite in a gun shop over at Johns Creek uh, a month or two ago. The single action trigger on that gun was perfect.
yeah.
The
Yeah, the
double
elites.
action was a little heavy, and so maybe 1,000 rounds through it, you know, going out and doing some consistent double action work on it might would
Right.
polish that gun into where it would be perfect. But then I would have to give sick money, and right now I don't know if I want to do that.
Right. Yeah.
Sir. Right now I just don't know. So I'm just every time I have tried to leave the Glock platform, I've come back to the Glock.
Right. No, that's funny because it's like every time I try to get away from the Glock platform,
Hmm.
um, I kept having to come back to it for work.
Yeah.
Because no matter how much I wanted to, get away
Hmm.
from it, not that it was just me
Yeah.
personally, how it points, all the things
Yeah.
we've talked about.
Yeah.
It was just like no matter what I did, every 3 months I was back out on your range teaching guys how to shoot that trigger again. I was like, damn it, I can't get away from this freaking pistol.
Well, see,
You know,
I still
and
have to
then,
carry a Glock for work, so I'm not going to
and
be the.
then I mean,
Yeah.
talk about looking a gift horse in the mouth. Then I retire and they give me a Glock for retirement. I'm like, damn it. Now I can't even sell this one. I gotta keep it. Yeah. So
Oh, it's funny. I bought a Glock 45 direct cut for an Acro um, just before I left the sheriff's office. And when I tried that gun, dry fire, took it out of the box. Oh, this was a good day at the factory, right,
right.
right
Yeah.
here. These guys got this right. After about 2,000 rounds, the wall in that trigger disappeared.
Oh,
And I had one instance where I was between positions 3 and 4 on the presentation and went to prep the trigger, and I fired a shot.
uh,
And thankfully, it went into the target and everything like that. So the
yeah.
muzzle was on target aligned.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I was all that good. Um, and then I was shooting a GSSF match, and I was going to to a far target and to prep the trigger, and I did it again, and I put one out in one of the penalty zones. I still got the hit, but I had a time
Right.
to my score, and I reached out to Glock Buddy who sent me, several connectors, and I went through and I intentionally made that trigger heavier,
Right.
to get the wall that I wanted on it.
Yeah.
Um, the Glock trigger, I don't necessarily look at it as a downside. I'm fine with the trigger. If I could get a straight back strap versus one with the humper,
Yeah.
which you get with the Shadow, and I've kind of thought of toying around with the Rigger RXM, but then the problem is if I go shoot Glock matches,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
right back into the thing. So I might as well just shoot the Glock.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get it.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, I'm looking. So FN came out with
Mm,
their reflex, right? I
yeah.
think it was to compete with the SIG 365s. Well, they came out with an XL version, so it's on par with SIGs. I don't know if it's a 365 macro, but it's on par with like the Glock 48, same size. But FN, to their credit, finally did it right. Was it's not a striker fired gun. It's a hammer fired gun with an internal hammer like the old 1903 Colt pistols.
Okay.
So it's single action only, but it's a double single trigger. It's not a striker trigger. There's actually a hammer inside the frame that goes. And I
Yeah.
went and I picked one up and it felt good. And I tried the trigger and I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah, the 48's going in the closet. Because like now it points the way I need it to
Yeah.
point, and it
Yeah.
gives me the single action trigger, not the striker trigger. So I'm like,
Yeah.
looks like I'm coming home to FN. So
Yeah. Well, like I say, I still have to shoot Glocks for work,
yeah,
and that's the other thing is most of my teaching these days is teaching LE classes, and I don't
yeah.
want to step on the range in front of them with some tricked out gun, so that the
No,
students just sit there going, "Well, the only reason he's able to do that is because he's got that fancy gun."
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as an instructor, one of my core things that I'll do
Yeah.
is I show up with whatever they use.
Yeah.
So if they're running Glocks, I'll show up with a Glock.
Yeah.
Now if it's a civilian class, then I'll just show up with whatever because you're
Yeah.
going to get whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
on the law enforcement military side, any of that
Yeah.
stuff, any type of an agency,
Hmm.
I'll try to find out what they're using and have
Yeah.
it. And between my SIG and my Beretta and a Glock, that covers me for virtually anything. And if a department uses an M&P, then I'll show up with a Glock because it's a striker
Yeah.
platform. So yeah, I think just as an instructor, um, you absolutely don't want to put yourself in a position where your students, like you said, that have had some training, been shooting for
Hmm.
years, rather than focus on their performance, they want to use you as an excuse and say, "Oh, well, if I had a $4,000 staccato, I could
Yeah.
do that too." No, you
Yeah.
can't. No, you
Yeah.
can't. That's why I'm here, right? You
Yeah.
can't do it with a Glock. You certainly aren't going to do it with a staccato. So yeah, just I
Yeah.
like to make sure that that's not a valid excuse for them. So I completely agree with you on that.
I will say that at a class a couple of months ago, um, one of the cop students showed up with a staccato P. A couple of the students said, "We want to see what you can do with that gun." And the guys like took that holster, here you go, and handed it to me. And it was another one of those days where the angels were sitting on my shoulder. And I lit it up and handed it back to him and said, "I'll stick with my Glock. Here, watch me do this with the Glock and everything."
Yeah, yeah, no, no.
Uh,
It's fun thing. There's one thing I've noticed about angels or luck or however you want to call it
yeah.
is the more you practice, the more they show up.
Yep. There you go.
So
There you go. Well, hey, we've been going probably a little over an hour and a half now, and I know we could talk for twice this length because I've seen us do it, but the audience probably wouldn't stay there with us that long.
I would
Uh,
tend to agree. I think they need an intermission.
and I appreciate the fact that it's Sunday and you gave up your time on short notice. Um, Anything else that you want to talk about that we didn't mention?
No, other than yeah, I think at some point if Steve feels like
Sure.
there's some more room for discussion, or if he wants to
Hmm.
respond, I think that would be great. Just kind of because
Right.
there was a couple of things like questions we raised about that.
Yeah.
But no, really. Other than that, I'll get out with you online. I think
Yeah.
I make a road trip out in March for that conference next year. So I want a little information about that. We can chat on that line. But other than that,
Okay.
man, I'm always here. You need a third party or a contrarian or something like that, let me know. I mean, now that I'm
Yeah.
retired, I can be that retired curmudgeon that always stirs crap up. So,
All right. Well, man, I appreciate you giving up your Sunday to come do this
dude, anytime, happy to
and
talk with you.
and play with your dog for me. I miss seeing him.
Oh, I can go get him. I left him inside because if not,
Yeah,
he's becoming very, very comfortable in his surroundings enough that I caught him the other day about 500 yards down the hillside,
yeah,
and I was like, "Get your furry butt back up here," But yeah,
yeah. I played fetch with him enough that we're cool, but I'm kind of like every now and then I like wonder like, is he calculating whether or not he's going to take me down?
no, are you kidding? If you got a lacrosse ball, you own him. You own him. He is
Yeah,
your best friend for life. So yeah,
yeah,
he hasn't changed a bit.
yeah. He has a gear his predecessor did not have.
Right? Yeah, yeah, he did. So
Yeah,
man, well, awesome time, and
yeah. No,
hit me up anytime, man.
sure thing, man. I appreciate it. And to the audience, we know that your number one asset is your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with us.